we're good. I promise we tested that earlier too. Thank you, Susie and Terry, for putting on this day and putting all the work into it that you did. Wasn't that meal wonderful? They put so much work into this day, and so I appreciate that. So I am Rachel, as Susie said earlier, and I am the daughter of Donald and Terry Pennington, for those of you who don't know me. And I don't think that she read the full bio, so that's okay. So I'll tell you about myself. So I actually live in Cincinnati with my husband and our house full of animals. These are our two dogs. On the left is a 6-year-old Major. He's a German Shepherd. And on the right is 11-year-old Boston. He's a Jack Russell Terrier. And they're quite a hilarious pair, as you can imagine. So, you know, dogs have pack mentality, right? Which one of them do you think is in charge? Some of you have met a Jack Russell Terrier before. So you know he is. He's a tiny little Napoleon, and he's in charge, and then the other one's like his big dopey sidekick, and it's hilarious. And then we also have 3 cats, which obviously you can't get cats wrangled to be in a picture. And I swore I was not a cat person, and then I just keep bringing them into my house because I have this bleeding heart for things that don't have homes, and so I just keep bringing them. But anyway, so we do live in Cincinnati. My husband's originally from Columbus, Ohio, but we met in Cincinnati, and that's where we live. I've been there for about the last 13 years, although I did grow up in northern Kentucky, in Dry Ridge, where Donald and Terry are from. And outside of writing and speaking, I actually do work full-time as well. I work for a logistics firm in Cincinnati, and I do national sales for them. So I travel every week for my job, which is really great. But this is what I'm really passionate about, and this is what I really feel like God is calling me to in my life. And so as I look around this room, before I even get started, I just want to point out, I understand that I am young enough to be most of your daughters. And so I imagine that there are some of you sitting out there thinking, what on earth does this little thing have to say to me that is going to possibly impact or apply to my life? And so I just want to get that all out there. I already know that you guys are thinking it. And so we're all on the same page. But I want to lay a foundation for today, and I want to get it right out in the open, first and foremost, that probably what I have in mind for refreshing today is probably not what's in your mind. When I first started planning this day with my mom, we had a conversation about, well, what's the theme going to be and what are we going to do? And the first thing that the Lord impressed upon me was the word refreshing. And I thought, okay, that's great, God, I love that. Now tell me where you want me to go with that. And it took about a month before I got anything else. But I was talking with Terry about, who's going to be in the room, and tell me where are they in their lives and what are they going through, and things like that. And so we started to talk about the people in there, and I said, talk about you all. And I said, well, I would love, because everywhere that I go, I tell my story, but I don't just want to tell my story and then people to walk away and go, oh, that's nice for her, bless her heart. I want to help people. I want to give them practical tools and practical things to walk away with after I tell my story. And so I said, I'd really like to get people to start brainstorming about their passions in life and what they think that God is calling them to and what their purpose might be and things like that. And I said, do you think, am I even remotely going in the right direction? And she said to me, no, I think that's really great. And she said, because where I am in my life is here I am. I just turned 60 years old. And I've done all these things in my life, and I've had my career, and I've done all these different things. And so here I am, and I'm going, Lord, I'm still here, but I kind of feel like I'm all used up. I kind of feel like I've done everything that I was supposed to do. And so, now what? What am I still here for? And I can't tell you how it made me feel to hear those words come out of my mom's mouth. And it would have been very, very discouraging to me to hear her say that if I hadn't already reached that exact same place in my life already for a completely different reason. And that if I didn't already have some tools and some lessons and some things of how to get out of that place and how to figure out now what from that perspective. And so I said, okay, that's great. That's what we're going to focus on today. But here's what I know. My mom can't be the only lady in this room that feels like that, right? And so I imagine that there are some of you that could feel that same way. And so what I want, the kind of refreshing that I want you all to leave here with today, it's a couple different things. I want you to leave refreshed in your hope. I want you to leave refreshed in your hope in your God, that He's alive, that He's real, He's very real and present in our lives today, that He cares about you, that He sees you, that He hears you. And I want you refreshed in your hope, in your hope about your future, that it's good. And then the second thing is I want you refreshed in your view of yourself. I want you to know that you have worth, that you're not useless, that you're not irrelevant, that you have value. And I want to refresh your view of your purpose. And so I know how easy it is to get beaten down in the routine and the monotony of everyday life and watch the days and the months and the years tick by and go, God, what am I here for? What is all this about? And we lose sight of the fact that there is something bigger going on, right? I want you to leave with a renewed vigor and excitement that you actually do have a very specific purpose and a calling for your life. Life can beat us down with demands and trials and sorrows and debilitating worries. And in those times when things seem overwhelming and hopeless, God's promises about our future can be very refreshing for us, right? It's like Jeremiah 29:11. Many of you are probably very familiar with this verse. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And in fact, as this day drew a little bit closer, I even started to second guess myself. And I thought, God, I'm talking to God, and I'm like, did I miss this? Like, I know it's refreshing to me to know, what I'm supposed to be doing in life and know my calling and all those things. But is that for everybody? And if I've missed this, let me know. And I'm sitting last weekend. I'm writing in my prayer journal, and I'm having this conversation with God. And literally within an hour of writing that in my prayer journal, I was on the phone with my old cheerleading coach from high school. I hadn't talked to her in 3 or 4 years, but she lives down in Louisiana, so I had called her to make sure, to check on if her and her family had been affected by the flooding in Louisiana, right? So we're on the phone, and I'm telling her, hey, by the way, since the last time that we were together, I wrote a book, and I've started public speaking, and she's, oh my gosh, look at you, and she's congratulating me and all these things, and I said, yeah, it's really great. I said, but it's a lot. It's a lot. And, I still work full time, and I'm doing these other things, and I feel all these things that God's called me to, and I said, it's a lot, and it's overwhelming. And I said, but I know for a fact that it's what God is calling me to, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's exactly what I was created for. And let me tell you what her response to me was. Her exact words to me were, isn't that refreshing? I think that was a confirmation. And so I started laughing. I said, you have no idea how funny it is that you said that to me. And she went on and she said, I don't even know if that's the right word. And she said, but I just remember when I reached that point in my life where I knew what I was supposed to be doing was teaching, because that's what she does in addition to coaching. She said, when I figured out I knew I was supposed to be a teacher, everything just clicked and the pressure was off and it was great. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get started. The first thing that I did was I looked up the definition of the word refresh. And refresh is a noun, and it means to give new strength or energy to reinvigorate. And some of the synonyms are revitalize, revive, restore, fortify, enliven, perk up, stimulate, freshen, blow away the cobwebs. I love that one. Friends, can I ask you, I know you already talked about this at your tables, what areas of your life right now do you need to blow away the cobwebs? What areas do you need to be restored and refreshed? Is it your marriage or other relationships? Is it your dreams? Is it your attitude? Is it your hope? Is it your faith? I don't know what that is for you. But then the antonym to refresh is weary. And so I looked up the word weary, and I loved the synonyms for it. Tired, worn out, exhausted, fatigued. These were really speaking to me. Burnt out, dog-tired, spent, Pooped and tuckered out. How many of you all have been pooped or tuckered out? Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm not alone. How many of you are exhausted and tired and worn out right now? Maybe you're burned out. Thank you. Yes, thank you for your honesty. Hallelujah. I saw these hilarious pictures on the internet a few months ago, and I said, I have to save those and I have to use those in a presentation sometime. And it says, I'm looking for a moisturizer to hide the fact I've been tired since 2008. Isn't that hilarious? And then the other one is, I feel like I'm already tired tomorrow. I mean, okay, thank you. So I'm not alone in that either. Let me tell you all, over the last year, I was really, really, really tired. And I was exhausted, and I was overwhelmed. I call 2015 the year that God stopped talking to me. And that's never good, but especially when you're in ministry, that's kind of a big deal. And so, don't get me wrong, 2015 was an incredible year. Especially on the surface and from the outside, 2015 was wonderful. But how many of you all know that we always show what's going great on the outside and what's going on the surface, but a lot of times we hide what's going on behind the scenes. And so that was my 2015. So in 2015, my husband and I, we bought our first house. It was awesome. I finished the last chapter of my book and started the publication process. I started public speaking. I took my parents to Hawaii for my mom's 60th birthday. Like 2015 was awesome. Behind the scenes, when we moved into our new house, everything happened within about a 2 or 3 month period of time. So we moved into our new house. My husband quit his job and went into business with his father. I started speaking, and when I started speaking, I felt like I didn't know, I felt like I wasn't qualified. I felt like I was in over my head, and it was very overwhelming. So all of that happened with about a 2 or 3 month period of time, and so it was very, very stressful. The first 2 months that my husband and I moved in our new house, we argued more than the previous 5 years of our entire relationship. How many can relate to that? And so, I mean, there was just so much stress. And then all this other stuff. I mean, I just felt like there were too many things being piled on my already too full plate, right? And so I was stressed, and so we were arguing, and then he's stressed out because of his transition, and so we're arguing more, and then we're arguing because we're stressed out. I mean, it was just all arguing all the time. And it was so stressful to the point that it literally almost broke my gallbladder. So, just within a couple weeks after we moved in our new house, I started having excruciating pain after I would eat. And it would happen a couple hours after I would eat, so at first I didn't even correlate that it was going with eating. And it would last for 3 or 4 hours at a time. It was kind of a bell curve of pain. And it would happen a lot of times overnight, so it would wake me up in the middle of the night. It was so painful I couldn't even sleep through it. And so I would wake up in this pain having no idea what it was. It was, I knew it was in my stomach, but I had no idea what was going on. I would sit up for hours just hunched over and curled up. That was the only way. I mean, it would tense up my back muscles. It was painful everywhere. And it went for about a period of about a month. All I ate was rotisserie chicken and apples, because those were 2 things I figured out wouldn't hurt me when I ate them. And that was before my doctor and I had figured out what it was. At first, he thought I had an ulcer, so that's what he was treating me for. And he's got me on this medication. And then after about the second time that it was the middle of the night, my husband and I were about to go to the emergency room. I was in so much pain. He said, I don't think this is an ulcer. And so I need you to go get an ultrasound, and I think that it's your gallbladder. And sure enough, that's what we found out that it was. And my gallbladder was really swollen and inflamed and irritated, and there were lots of stones in there, and one of the stones had gotten stuck in the neck of the gallbladder, and that's what was causing the irritation and the pain. And I'm talking, like, pain, we're talking about, like, I was digging into, like, the wisdom teeth surgery leftover medications. Like, I'm taking Vicodin and Percocet and, like, anything that I could find, and it would not touch the pain. And after we figure all this out, I do all this research, I became a gallbladder expert. And I found out that the level of pain that I was in when what was happening with my gallbladder happens, they treat you with morphine in the hospital. So that's the level of pain that I was experiencing. And then, so this is going on, and I'm sitting up all these nights in this pain, and so I'm only getting 2 or 3 hours more of sleep a night, so that's causing more stress. And then while we were in Hawaii on vacation, I found out my best friend from high school overdosed on heroin. And then we're back home from vacation, and it's New Year's Eve, and our basement flooded in our new house. And I am, in all those months, all those nights that I sat up in pain with my gallbladder, I left out this part of the story. So, right away, as soon as I found out it was my gallbladder, they have surgery to take that out, right? So I'm like, let's take this thing out of here and just, be done with this and get it all fixed. And there were 2 people in my life that spoke to me very clearly that God was instructing me not to have my gallbladder removed. And so I'm like, okay, God, this is great. If you're going to heal me supernaturally, and we're just going to get it done, and I'm going to have this great testimony, and it's going to be awesome. And then, that's not what happened overnight. And so it's months and months and months that I'm sitting up in these sleepless nights with this gallbladder pain. And I'm up, and I am, when I'm waking up, I decided, okay, this is spiritual warfare, right? The devil is coming after me for something. And so I'm up, and I'm quoting scripture, and I'm worshiping I'm singing worship songs, and I'm doing everything that I need to do. I'm being so faithful in this. God, you've instructed me not to have my gallbladder removed. And we're gonna heal this together. We're gonna do this together. And so I start asking him, since you're not doing this immediately, supernaturally, like I thought you were going to, then why are you causing this to take so long? Why are you delaying the healing process? So I start talking to him about that, and I said, there's obviously something that you want me to be learning through this process. And my heart was completely pure. I'm like, God, if there's something that I need to be getting right now, if there's a lesson that I need to take out of this, just tell me what it is. Tell me what I'm supposed to be learning, and let's learn it and go. I am happy to just learn so we can move on. And the answer that I got from him was complete and utter silence. Not a word, not a peep. For months, this went on. And so New Year's Eve, and our basement flooded, and I said, oh God, what are we doing here? Why is all this happening? Don't you see that I'm being faithful to you? Don't you see that I am doing these things that you're calling me to do? So let me back up for you all. For those of you who don't know my whole story, I'm not going to go into the whole thing today. My whole story is in my book, and I hoped to have copies of it that I could sell to you all today, but it's still in production. So if you want to order it, you can pre-sale it in the back. We'll deal with that later. But my whole story is in there. But I'm going to give you a real quick snippet of it today. So I grew up, like I said, in northern Kentucky, in the small farm town, and we grew up in church. The church that we went to, my dad's family actually helped found. We were there. Some of y'all can attest. We were there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, every week of Bible school, every week of VBS, every week of revival, church camp every summer, every youth. We were there all the time. And so I grew up in that environment. And I was really, really good at being the really good church girl. And I thought that what I was going to do with my life what I thought God was calling me to do was to speak and teach and train to young girls, to teenage girls, about abstinence. That's something I became really passionate about in high school. I saved myself for marriage, and so this is what I thought God's calling me to, right? So I got married really young. I got married at 21. And then 4.5 years later, I found myself divorced. And so I'm going, well, I followed that plan, and that did not work for me. And so, first of all, I don't even know if I believe in that anymore. And secondly, who would listen to me about that? Who the heck would want to take that advice? Because I did that, and that plan did not work for me. And so I started to ask God, now what am I supposed to do with my life? If that's not it, what the heck am I supposed to do? And that's why that's the title of my book. I skipped these scriptures, I apologize. I can come back to those. But that's why that's the title of my book. And I even wrote a definition for what a now what moment is in this moment in your life that you go to. A now what moment is an event or sequence of events that culminates into asking oneself and one's life, now what, usually out loud. The very lowest point of your life, The moment when everything you believed in comes crashing down around you, the trajectory of your future jolts to a halt, and you're left looking at the shattered pieces of your dreams, wondering if life will ever look like the picture you had in your mind again. Now, what moments are often accompanied by feelings of lostness or hopelessness, see also rock bottom. So that's the point that I reached in my life when my divorce happened. And not only did I feel like I felt like a failure. That's the biggest thing that you feel when you go through a divorce. I don't know why that is, but it just is. The line of thinking is, my marriage failed, therefore I failed, therefore I am a failure. And you take on that identity. And so I felt tainted, and I felt like damaged goods. And I felt like I had blown my purpose for my life. I felt like I wouldn't be able to really accomplish anything with my life after that, especially not be able to be used in anything like ministry, right? Like, who's going to listen to me? What credibility do I have? Has anybody ever felt like that? That your past has disqualified you from your purpose, right? Well, what I figured out was that my past not only didn't disqualify me from my purpose, it qualified me for my purpose. It became the qualification for my purpose. The other thing that I went through when I went through that, not only did I feel lost and like I didn't have a future, but I became very bitter and angry at God. Very. Because I had done what He told me to do, and I had followed His plan, and then I still ended up in this place. And so I didn't want anything to do with Him. I ran as fast and as hard and as far as away from God that I could. I didn't want anything to do with Him. I didn't want anything to do with church. I didn't want anything to do with religion. I didn't want anything to do with any of that. And it was in that place, when I was running fast and hard and far away, that He chased after me relentlessly and passionately. It was unlike anything I had ever known. And He met me in that place. And here's what He said to me, and actually it came about in the strangest of circumstances, but who knows, God can talk to us about any way that He wants to, when He wants to get a message across. I read this book called The Shack by William Paul Young, if you've ever heard of it. Some of you, I see nods, so some of you have read it. And for me, what that book was a love letter from God to me. It was Him saying to me, honey, all those things that you think that you know about me, all those rules and regulations and guilt and condemnation and religion, that's not me. Come get to know me for yourself. Come get to know who I am. For those of you who haven't read the book, I'll give you just a real quick snapshot of what it is without ruining it for you, I promise. The story is about this man named Mac, who he has kind of a messed up relationship with his dad already. But he is on a camping trip with his family, and at that time his 4-year-old daughter is kidnapped and then brutally murdered by a serial killer. And so he ends up in this place where he's very angry and bitter at God, and he's running away from Him. And he gets this letter in the mail inviting him for a retreat to this shack. It just so happened to be the shack where they found his daughter's bloodstained dress. And so he doesn't know if this is a cruel joke or some sort of prank or what's going on. And so sure enough, he goes to the shack ready, and the letter was signed by Papa, by God. And so he goes to the shack ready to fight somebody, probably. And what he finds there is he ends up having an encounter with the 3 persons of the Trinity. And like I said, I'm not going to spoil the rest of the story for you, but the bulk of the rest of the book is the lessons and the conversations that he has with the 3 different persons of God. And so again, that was God saying, because in the book, just so you know, God is a sassy, plump black woman. And so for me, like, that book just took my head and put it on tilt. I mean, it was unlike anything that I had ever, where I'm from, that's heresy. You do not even insinuate that could be possible. And so it put my head on tilt about who God was and what He really has to say. And so He invited me in and He said, come get to know me for yourself. And so I did. And I started over on a complete spiritual blank slate. I started from scratch. And, let me figure out what He really says and what this is really all about. And so that's where I was. And I figured out that because what I had been through, now for the first time ever, I experienced compassion and empathy for other people. I told you guys, I grew up in church, and I was really good at being the good church girl. So there was black and white, and there was wrong and right, and there was no in between. And if you missed the mark, you missed the mark, and you were shamed and shunned, and that was it. I had no concept of the word grace, or what that meant, or what that looked like. And I was learning that for the first time in first person. Because it was at my lowest, when I was dirtiest, and when I was the most unworthy, that God was chasing after me in a very real and intimate way. Right? And so I said, okay, I can get this. Now I can do this for other people. And so I learned how to have compassion and empathy. And what I learned was, because what I had been through, now I can have an impact on other people. God literally refreshed my purpose. I'm not here today talking to young girls about abstinence, but I'm here talking to you, right? And so he showed me how, again, my past didn't disqualify me, but it became the qualification for my purpose. So I'm walking all that out, right? I wrote my book. I started by ministering to people one-on-one, sitting down over cups of coffee. I started speaking, and then all this stuff happens. So we're back to New Year's Day on my couch. Y'all thought I forgot, didn't you? And so I'm there, and my face is red-stained, and my eyes are puffy, and my throat is hoarse from screaming at God by that point, in particularly colorful language at times. I'm very imperfect. And I'm just crying out to him, God, why are you making me go through this? Why? Don't you see I'm being faithful? Don't you see I'm being obedient? Don't you see I'm being a good steward of all the things that you give to me and of all the opportunities and all the people that you put in my path? Why are we doing this? This isn't fair. And if you're not going to make it stop, at least tell me what I'm supposed to be learning. Say something to me. And still, silence. Absolute silence. I felt so spiritually dry. It felt like I was in a desert. And I had heard of people, I've heard people say that before in and around church, right, about talking about spiritual desert seasons. So I thought, oh, maybe that's what I'm supposed to be getting at. So I start doing research, and let me study spiritual desert seasons and see if I can get any insight from this. So I start studying, and I'm studying the Israelites in the desert, and you know, they're there for 40 years. But you know what I also learned as I was studying that? Is that the Israelites also had 500 years of silence. That was not refreshing to me to hear that. That was not something that I wanted to hear at that time. In fact, those 500 years of silence were the time between when the Messiah was prophesied and the time that Jesus was born, right? And in those 500 years, God didn't say another single word to his people or through his prophets. And this time was actually the stretch of time between when the Old Testament ended and when the New Testament begins. Random fun fact, that's actually when Alexander the Great lived. He lived in that period of time, so that's why he's a real person, but he's not in the Bible. I'm a huge history nerd, so I love that. But for 500 years, there was silence. Entire generations died just waiting. And so I start asking God, well, what was that all about? Is there a greater purpose to it? Were you trying to teach them something? Did you just stop caring about them? Was it their disobedience? Did you stop caring about me? Have I messed up somehow? What is this all about? When Moses recalls their time in the desert, he exerts the Israelite people to remember this and to say this to themselves. He led me through the vast and dreadful desert, that thirsty and waterless land with its venomous snakes and scorpions. He brought me water out of a hard rock. He gave me manna to eat in the desert. And I can tell you, I sure didn't feel like I was being led by God. I felt like he had left me on the side of the road and gone on vacation. And so here's the rest of the story for you. A couple months prior to my New Year's Day meltdown, a friend had reached out to me. She had actually just recently been through divorce as well. And she reached out to me and said, hey, I'm really struggling today. She said, today I'm struggling with feeling like a failure. And I said, girl, you're preaching to the choir. That's exactly what I felt when I went through my divorce, and I know exactly how you feel. And she said, I wondered if you could just give me some scripture. Do you have any verses or some scripture that I could go to really help me through this? And my response to her was, that's not really how God talks to me. I said, God talks to me directly, like I get thoughts in my mind and I know that that's him. Or he talks to me through other people, or he talks to me through songs, or, I hear lyrics and I go, I know that's from you, God, or I read a book about him or about the Bible. I know the Bible stories, but sorry, I don't have any scripture to give you. And so I gave her a couple real encouraging, uplifting songs and a book to read, and I sent her on her way. And I had tried reading the Bible myself. Several times. I tried reading it front to back. Has anybody tried that? We've all tried to read it front to back at least once. Some of you may have been successful. That was not me. And so I had tried when I would go through certain things, I would flip to the back of the concordance and I would look up whatever topic I was dealing with, and I would go look at those scriptures, and every single time I would come up blank. Like, I'm reading those scriptures going, this doesn't have anything to do with what I'm going through. And so I had decided, that doesn't work for me. And so anytime that I was going through something, I would find a Christian book on the topic, or I would find a pastor or another speaker teaching or talking about that topic. And that's how I would get through those seasons. But when I went through this situation, I was listening to healing messages, and I was really diving into other people teaching me about the Word. But when I was going through this, about this same period of time, a friend had recommended a book to me that she actually was helping me with a section of my book. See, there's one of the chapters in my book, I talk about the lies that we hear in our heads and all the voices that are in there. That's really the voice of our enemy, right? And then I talk about how you should refute those lies with Scripture, and you should really, figure out exactly what God has to say about you versus what you're hearing in your head. And but I just wrote that in the book, like, this is what you should do. And then a couple different people, once they read my book, said, you should really lead people through that. You should go and find Scripture to refute those lies that you're talking about when were in your head. And I gave them the same answer. Yeah, that's not really how I work, And so my friend said, well, I'll help you. So she gave me the copy of this book called the Complete Personalized Promise Bible for Women. And so we worked through that together. We went lie by lie in my book, and we found scripture to refute those lies. And so now that's in my book. There's a whole exercise that helps you do that. And so I had already had a copy of this book. So while I was going through all that stuff, I'm, up again one night dealing with it. And so I pull out that book and I start reading. And what my plan was to, look up the different healing scriptures and promises. It's topical. So for every section, there's a promise, and then there's a faith confession for that promise, and then there are scriptures that back up every one of the promises. So I was like, I'm going to go study all the healing scriptures and confess all this stuff and really dive into this. But I started from page 1, and I'm really glad that I did. And let me read this to y'all, because I think that you're going to get a lot out of it too. It is my sincere prayer that your life will be changed as you declare each of these promises. If sickness has taken hold of your body through these pages, I stand in agreement for your healing. If the spirit of poverty has you under its cruel hand of oppression, I stand in agreement that you are set free. Please, child of God, don't be duped into thinking that your hardships are God's will. He wants you to live a life full of joy, freedom, and peace. Read His promises. They are His will for you. 2 Corinthians 1:20 decrees that every one of them is yours. Claim them today and enter into the abundant life Jesus paid for you to enjoy. He goes on to say, being a man, I can approach this work from a unique perspective. I have a sense of how a father responds to the daughter he loves. Every step she takes, every smile that graces her face, and every new accomplishment in her life is precious in His sight. You, my sister, are God's precious daughter. Even now, Daddy is holding you close to His heart. He is with you every moment. He declares your name with pride and sings songs of you in the presence of angels. How sweet is that? You have no idea how much God's love is pouring through me towards you at this very moment. He loves you dearly. And as you read these words, He is looking upon you with such pride it defies description. All of those things you think He is ashamed of are non-existent in His eyes. He nailed them to the cross of Jesus, and all He can see now is the perfection of the daughter that He loves. These are the promises that have made you a member of the royal family of God. Meditate on them and speak them in the spirit of faith. Know with certainty that you are a daughter of the King. How refreshing is that? And so I read that, and I started reading that book. I just read from page 1, and I went in, and it didn't take me more than just a couple weeks before I came across this verse in 2 Thessalonians. So then, brothers and sisters, stand firm and hold fast to the teachings we passed on to you, whether by word of mouth or by letter. And as soon as I read that, it just jumped out at me, and it was so clear. And it occurred to me that this is Paul writing to the church in Thessalonica, right? So the people of God are hearing from God at this point in time via Paul through written letters. And in that moment, it was as if Paul was saying to me, hey, God wrote you a letter, read it. And so it was just so clear to me. The Bible is called God's Word. It's literally God's words, written down and preserved in time for thousands of years for us to go back and revisit anytime that we need to. I was so humbled in that moment, and I just thought, how arrogant of me to expect the creator of the universe to speak to me anytime that I want in exactly the way that I want. And all that time that I was in the desert, He was talking to me right in those pages the whole time, and I wasn't looking in the right place. How many tears and how many angry words would I have saved myself if I had just looked there sooner? Right? How different would 2015 have been for me? And so I just had to pray this prayer that I pray to God over and over and over and over again. God, thank you so much for not leaving me, for not giving up on me, for giving me your unconditional and everlasting grace, because you know I need it. I mean, it's just as much as you've got, it's what I need. And so there's another verse in the story about the Israelites in Isaiah that says this: be alert and be present. I'm about to do something brand new. It's bursting out. Don't you see it? There it is. I'm making a road through the desert and rivers in the Badlands. So even in our desert seasons, God is still refreshing us. P.S. Here's the rest of the story. My gallbladder is completely healed and whole and functions completely in the way that it was designed to by God. It's awesome. Hallelujah for that glory. It took longer than I wanted, but here's what I learned about that. And I honestly just had this revelation this past week. As I was going back and I was listening to, this is not my notes, Joyce Meyer has a CD set that I've had for years, and it's called Wilderness Mentalities. And it talks about the whole CD series, it's 6 CDs, and she talks about the Israelites wandering in the desert for 40 years and all the things that were keeping them there. It was their wrong mindset, right? And so I'm listening to that, and she starts talking about how the journey from where they were in slavery to the Promised Land, from Egypt to the Promised Land, was only an 11-day journey, right? Some of you all probably heard this story, but I'm going to give you a real quick recap. So it's an 11-day journey, but it took them 40 years to make that 11-day journey. And when they set out, there was a quicker way that they could have even gone, but God took them the long, hard way on purpose. And the point that she's making in there is that once the Israelites got to the Promised Land, you guys know the rest of the story, there were going to be enemies there that they had to fight that they weren't prepared for when they left Egypt, right? And so God needed to prepare them by taking them that long, hard way, that they could gird themselves up and they could grow in their strength and they could grow in their faith. And they would have to trust Him and rely on Him, so that by the time that they got to the Promised Land, they had that down pretty good, right? And so it occurred to me this week as I'm listening to that, I'm trying to be in ministry, right? And so, like, what kind of person in ministry doesn't read the Bible? And so, obviously, God needed to take me through that season, because if he had just given me that answer and given me that healing supernaturally overnight as quickly as I wanted it, I never would have had to take the time to look in his word and find that for myself. And so, he was preparing me for the enemies and the things that I have to fight in the future of my ministry, right? If you listen to Joyce Meyer, she says it all the time, new level, new devil, right? So there are places that God is taking me. There are going to be things that I need to be spiritually prepared for. So again, that wasn't in my notes, and you just got that as a bonus. So here's what I don't want to happen today. Again, like I said, I don't want you to leave here and go, oh, that's so nice for her. God bless her heart. I want you to leave here knowing, I want you to have a fresh awakening of the fact that God is no respecter of persons. And the things that he's done in my life, he can and he will and he wants to do in your life. And that's the important part to remember. Because a lot of times it's easy for us to acknowledge God's power and his magnificence and what he can do, but maybe think, but would he do that in my life? And we struggle to believe that. And I want you to tell you that he wants to do the same things that he's done in my life, in your life. I also want you to know that there's nothing that you have done that will make God stop loving you, stop pursuing you, or stop having purpose for you. Susie Eller is an author and speaker with Proverbs 31 Ministries, and she says it this way: your God still loves you. His plan has not been erased because of your mistake. In this crossroad, run toward his open arms and begin anew. Secondly, like I said earlier, I want to give you some practical tools to figure out how all this does apply to you in your life. In a little bit, we're going to break out, and I've got worksheets for you to do where you're going to start brainstorming, like I said, about your passions and about your callings and those type of things that'll lead you through that. And then my vision for the day is that you all, after you fill those out, we'll get back together in your small groups. So whoever you were sitting at your table with, already starting this discussion with today, and just kind of discuss those things with each other. And if you see something in somebody else, affirm that in them. Yeah, I totally see that in you. I believe that God, has put that in you and that he wants that for you. So that's my vision for that. But here's what I learned about God. He doesn't just restore you. He always takes things a step further. In Ephesians 3:20, the author says this: now to him, God, who is able to do far more abundantly beyond all that we ask or think or can even imagine, according to the power that works in us. Now, my story is about God refreshing my life after divorce, completely restoring it, right? But I know that my story doesn't apply to everybody in here. I do know that the divorce rate in America today is greater than 50%, and that the church is not exempt from that. So statistically speaking, probably about half of you in here could relate to that. But what I do know is that all of us have been through something in our life that has made us feel hopeless or lost or like a failure. That has made you, something that's made you look up and go, now what, God? A few years ago, I read a book called The Lineage of Grace. I think I have a picture of it, by Francine Rivers. And it's about 5 women in the bloodline of Jesus. And it's each of their stories, and it's about how, in each of their unique stories, about how God moved mountains in their lives, not only to redeem the broken places, but to do crazy things, to do things above and beyond what they could think of or imagine, right? Huge purposes for them. And I particularly relate to and love Bathsheba's story. Bathsheba was in the bloodline of Jesus. That was the first revelation for me, like, oh my goodness. But, everybody's familiar with the story probably, but quick recap. So David and Bathsheba, David was the king of Israel, and they had an affair, and she got pregnant through their affair, and then to cover it up, David had her husband killed in battle. That's pretty scandalous. That's about as bad as it gets. But still, God wasn't done with Bathsheba. It went on. David took Bathsheba as his 7th wife, because he already had 6 others before her. And Bathsheba goes on to become David's favorite wife. And she bore him 4 sons, one of whom, Solomon, went on to become heir of David's throne and the steward of God's people. And so, like, who would have seen that coming? Like, how crazy is that? But that's the kind of love that God has for us. And that's the kind of redemptive power that he has in our lives. Here's a fresh revelation I want you to get today. You were created on purpose, for a purpose. Rick Warren, a lot of you have probably heard of his book, Purpose Driven Life. He says, if you're alive, there's a purpose for your life. Many of you have probably heard people say, I'm just waiting for the Lord to take me home. Or maybe you've even thought that or said that yourself. But if you're still here on earth, there's a reason for that. It's not an accident. It's not a fluke. He didn't forget that he left you down here. Oh, dang it, Susie, I thought you were already... No, like, he hasn't forgotten about you. And so if you're here, there's a reason for that. Even still in this season that you're in your life. And so I want you to know that. He has something for you to accomplish. And here's what I know about our purposes. They're going to be bigger than you, and they're going to involve touching other people. They're going to involve touching other people's lives. Terry Saville Foy, she's author of a book called Make Your Dreams Bigger Than Your Memories, and she says this in there. Someone in need is waiting on the other side of your obedience right now. Think about that. There are people who need you to share what you have been through to help them get out of the mess they're in. You have a story. You have a testimony. You have the wounds to prove that you've been through a tough time. That's exactly what I discovered about my story. But every one of you has a story. And it can be used in the same way. C.S. Lewis says it this way: you are never too old to set a new goal or dream a new dream. So maybe some of you all are sitting in here like my mom saying, okay, like I've done all this stuff in my life and I feel like I'm used up. Now what am I supposed to be doing? But there may be some of you in here who are going, well, now I'm 50 or 60 years old and I haven't done anything that I wanted to do in my life. I haven't accomplished any of the things that I wanted to accomplish. And it doesn't matter which side of that you're on. I don't want you to lose hope in either case. I imagine most of you are familiar with the story of Abraham's wife, Sarah, and how she laughed at God at the idea that she would be the mother of many nations at 90 years old, right? But God was faithful, and he made that happen because that's what he does. But you might not be familiar with some modern day success stories about people who've had success later in life. So I'm a huge I Love Lucy fan, so I could not leave Lucille Ball out. Did you know that she was 40 years old before I Love Lucy started? And that was the role that led to her stardom. Ray Kroc of McDonald's. He was in his 50s. He was at 52, and he was the milkshake salesman selling the milkshake machines to the McDonald's brothers. And then he decided they had just had 1 or 2 restaurants and decided that was it, and he saw a bigger vision for it. So he bought the restaurants from them, and it's now today what is the largest franchise in the world. And then we're in Kentucky, so we can't not talk about Colonel Sanders and KFC. Praise Jesus for KFC. But he was 65. And he had had so much failure. He had been fired from over a dozen jobs. He'd started a company of his own and failed in that, gone out of business. And what happened was, this is such an interesting story. He got his first Social Security check, and it was for $105. As if that's not discouraging enough. But for him, he was kind of offended in that he felt like the government was saying to him he couldn't take care of himself. And so he said, I'm not going to deal with this. And so he studied himself, and he asked himself, what is it that I can do better than anybody else? Or what is it that I do really well? And what can I do to bring value to other people? And so he said, well, I cook really, really well. So rather than just starting his own restaurant, because he'd already tried that, he went door to door to over 1,000 other restaurants. 1,000. More than 1,000 people told him no, and he kept going. to try to sell his chicken recipe. Finally, it worked, and KFC is also one of the largest franchises today. There's more stories. Walt Disney, he was also later in his life when he started to have the success with Disneyland and things like that. His story is interesting. He approached over 302 banks to try to get someone to fund Disneyland in California. It was going to be the first permanent circus carnival in history, so a lot of people didn't see the vision for it. But obviously at some point somebody did buy into his vision. But you know what's really interesting about his story? Is that Disneyland opened in his lifetime, but Disney World in Florida he had the vision for, and he kind of started fundraising and planning for, but it didn't open until 5 years after his death. So even after he was gone, his visions were coming to fruition. Julia Child, she was 50 before she wrote her first cookbook. And then some of you all may or may not be familiar with Anna Marie Robertson Moses, better known as Grandma Moses, if you've heard that name. She was a painter. She didn't start painting until she was 78. And one of her paintings in 2006, sold for $1.2 million. That's crazy. Joyce Meyer was 33 before she started in ministry. And she was previously divorced. And when I hear stories like that, it refreshes me. It gives me so much hope to know, I can still do those things despite what I have been through. Still, I can be used. I recently went to a conference in North Carolina. It was put on by Proverbs 31 Ministries, and it was called She Speaks. And it's a conference for Christian women who want to write and speak and lead. And so I walk in this room of 800 women, and I was surprised. There were some women in there that were my age, but I would say if not half, if not more, of the women in that room were older. They were in their 40s and 50s and 60s that were in there following this call that God had in their life to write and speak for Him. And I'm not saying that God has called you to write or speak, but maybe He has. You have been specifically created and gifted in a way that will allow you to accomplish whatever this dream and this calling is. Just 2 nights ago, as I was preparing this talk, I saw a similar post on Instagram, kind of like what I did, where I went through different people's stories that had success later in life. And the author ended it with, "You're not too old and it's not too late. Don't look at the years," I have it up here, "don't look at the years you've lost. Look at the years you've got left and start living your dreams." I know sometimes we can dream really big dreams, but then we get caught up in wondering if we're qualified for them, if we've got what it takes, if we can really do that. Joel Osteen says it this way: God would not have put a dream in your heart if He hadn't already given you everything you need to fulfill it. And I love what Kenneth Copeland says. He says, when He called you, that's when He qualified you. Not after the fact. There isn't anything that you need to do or come up with on your own. Any passion that He's put in your heart, He's also given you those corresponding gifts for, right? A few years ago, every year, I put a quote on the front of my planner. I'm old school. I still carry a hard copy planner. And every year I put a quote on it. At the beginning of the year, I sit down and I pick a quote to put on there. It's going to be my mantra for the year. And a couple years ago, this is the quote that I picked. Your life has purpose. Your story is important. Your dreams count. Your voice matters. You were born to make an impact. And I put that quote on the front of my planner before I started speaking, before my book was even finished. And when I put that quote on my planner, I didn't believe a single one of those words was true for my life. And I put that on there because I needed to be reminded of that as often as every single day. Friends, what dreams and passions are planted inside your heart that you've been sitting on? What gifts and unique talents and abilities has God put inside you from the day that you were born that you haven't been using to their fullest potential? what you start in the time that you have left, you might not even see come to fruition in your lifetime. It may outlive you, just like Walt Disney. But what a great way to go out, right? I want to tell you one last story, and it's very simple. My mentor reminded me of this just as I was preparing for this talk. He said, when you go into a room of 100 people, how many lives do you have the potential to impact? 100, right? He said, that math makes sense, right? And I said, yeah, 100. And he said, no, that's not the right answer. This is kind of the way that he talks to me and everyone. He said, that's not the right answer. And he said, when you go in and you're talking to 100 people, you have the ability to impact an infinite number of lives. Because those people have people in their life that you're not going to talk to, and then those people have people, and those people have people, and it goes on for infinity. It's limitless. It's kind of like the old analogy of how many seeds are in an apple versus how many apples are in a seed. Because a seed becomes a tree that grows hundreds of apples every year that has seeds that then becomes more trees. So you have the ability in your life to impact people who aren't even born yet. Think about that for a second. It's not too late. You're not too old. You're not used up. Nothing. You're not disqualified in any way. You're exactly where you need to be and uniquely qualified in the way that you need to be to do what God is going to do in your life. Like I said, we're going to break out and we're going to do worksheets, and I'd like to pray over us before we go do that. God, thank you so much for every single one of these ladies in this room. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak into their lives today. God, I pray that they didn't hear me and that they can get past what I look like and what I sound like and that they only heard your words of truth today, God. And I just ask that you plant those seeds of truth in their hearts and that they grow up, that you water and fertilize them so that they grow up into the harvest of hope and belief and purpose. I ask that you choke out any weeds of doubt and insecurity and fear and shame in their lives that might keep them from believing what you have for them and what you say to them is true. I ask that you would open their eyes and open their minds to the things that you're going to speak to them today, that they would receive them, that they would have the wisdom and the knowledge and the passion and the courage to act on those things, God. We thank you so much for everything. We thank you for loving us. We thank you for never giving up on us. And we thank you most of all for sending your Son to die for us so that we get to spend eternity with you. It's in his name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Is somebody going to wrap up?
Huh?
Nobody's going to wrap up. Okay. No. Okay. So the worksheets are out here, and if you all want, we can. It's up to you guys. So I can bring them in and pass them out in here, and then you guys can just fill them out here and kind of talk in your groups as you're now, or you can go back in that other room. She wants to go into the other room, so that's what we're going to do. So we'll grab worksheets as you're on your way.